David Brodie, welcome to the Winging It Travel podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, James.
Thanks for making the time and effort to make your way to West Vancouver.
Happy to. Always happy to travel over to this part of the town.
Where are you based?
I'm based in a small town just outside of Vancouver called Ladner. It's about a probably 30-minute drive from downtown Vancouver. It used to be a little fishing village, and we've been there for probably about 10 years now.
Oh, wow. And have you lived in Vancouver City? Or has it always been just on the outskirts?
Mostly on the outskirts. When we first moved to Vancouver, we rented a loft apartment from an actor, so I think we had that for our first 6 months or so here, and then we were out in Steveston for a little while. And we've been out there.
Nice, yeah.
And then migrated from a townhouse in Steveston out to a house in Ladner.
Okay, and where are you based, or where did you grow up originally in Canada?
Originally grew up just outside of Edmonton, a small town on the prairies called Spruce Grove, which is, if you're familiar with like Jasper, Banff National Park, it's probably about a 3-4 hour drive from there, about a 20-minute drive from Edmonton. Kind of on your way to Jasper.
God, that sounds like the middle of nowhere.
Yes, it absolutely is.
Because we drove across Canada last year, and when you go through the middle part, basically past the Rockies, it's desolate, isn't it?
There's a whole lot of, not much for a good portion of that drive, yes.
But amazing, because you get to see different parts of you go from like the amazing Rockies to, I guess, farmland, but it's good to see that contrast, isn't it?
For sure. And no, it was a great place to grow up. I love Spruce Grove.
Okay, and why did you settle in Vancouver or the area?
I'd coming out of Alberta, I'd gone out to Eastern Canada and worked in politics for a few years. Then the guy I was working with lost an election.
That's not good.
And as a result of that, had some time on our hands. So me and my wife went and spent about a year traveling around the world. And when we finished that, we sort of spent a lot of time thinking about where we wanted to live in the world, and both of us thought that there was nowhere that sort of appealed to us more than Vancouver, between the ocean, the mountains, the easy access to other destinations as well. Was just a place we loved.
We're going to come into your year trip just down the line, but before we get there, I'm quite intrigued my guest about hearing about how they grew up into travel, because there's so many different stories of my guests where they've been well into it, as in their parents took them on trips all the time, to people who never went anywhere. So what was your upbringing like in terms of travel?
Well, it's a bit of both, in that we did a lot of travel, but it was all, I would say 95% of it within Canada and mostly within BC and Alberta. It was a lot of camping trips. Every summer we would take a big 2 or 3 week trip out to Vancouver Island. Sometimes we would go down into the States a little bit, but it was really those camping trips through the Rockies, through BC and Alberta, that really first sparked my love for travel. And then our first international trip we did was sort of down to Disney in LA and across the border to Mexico on a day trip, which just blew my mind and changed my whole perspective on everything.
Was that a culture shock?
It was, but more than anything, it was just, I can very distinctly remember it was doing a day trip on a bus from San Diego across the border to Tijuana. You get there, and I was 6 years old at the time, but you're for the first time in a place where everybody speaks a different language, where all the food is different, and it's these foods that I loved, but the authentic local versions of them. I remember that first street taco, for example. And what really stands out in my mind is the first time going to like a local market there, right? And doing bartering for things. And it was just so wild, so different than anything I'd ever seen before, that I knew, wow, I want to do a lot more of that for sure.
So that maybe was the start of your journey?
100%. Like that definitely was the thing that inspired me to want to travel a lot more, but then really didn't get a chance to do that until I was about 18, where I did my first big solo trip alone. Okay,
we're going to come to that. Just a couple more questions. Where does career fit into this, in terms of growing up? Were you thinking of a career path, or was it like most people? I was very like, I don't know, I'll see what happens. But what was yours like?
It was, I had always gravitated towards sort of social studies, history, things like that, politics. So my career ended up very much going down that path. Was very, the first 10 years of my career was all sort of working in politics, but travel was a big part of that. I could see travel as something that I wanted to continue to have as part of my career. So when I made a transition from working in politics to then PR next, travel was a big part of that. And now transitioning to running a travel podcast network, I'm assuming travel is going to be a fairly big part of that as well.
I'll be very surprised if it isn't.
Yes.
That's awesome. That's such an eclectic journey.
For sure.
Yeah, you must have experienced so many different types of like workplaces, people, countries as well, all within just your career.
Absolutely, and very much gravitated towards elements of my career that would allow me to incorporate particularly international travel, and jobs that allowed for that was something that very much attracted me. And I've also been really lucky in a lot of the industries that I've worked in, particularly working in PR for a good portion of my career, that got enough time for PTO, personal travel as well, that that was a big part of staying in some of those jobs probably as long as I did as well.
PTO is a bit of a nightmare though, isn't it? Because you are kind of restricted, aren't you?
For sure. A lot less, I think, here in North America than normally what you get in the UK and over in Europe, although luckily in the public relations industry it tends to be pretty generous in terms of most of its PTO policies. So.
Yeah, and then I've got a lot of listeners from the States. I mean, that's only 2 weeks if you're lucky.
Yeah, for sure. Although I know that the agency that I worked for example, which we had offices in the States and in the UK, we used to give people 3 weeks vacation right off the bat. Plus, we shut down the office for about 2 weeks over that Christmas New Year period.
Good. Yeah.
So that was a pretty good start. And then every few years you accumulated another week as well.
Yeah.
And so a fair bit of flexibility.
Wow. Okay. We're going to go into what you called your travel resume, which I love that term. Yeah. Because I don't even know where to start here. It's going to be so much I'm going to pick out because I'm really intrigued. But we are going to start what you mentioned before about your year backpacking trip with your wife. Was that a conscious decision just to go for a year? Was it circumstance that you went for a year? Was it planned much? How did it come about initially?
Well, that was an interesting trip. So that came in our probably kind of late 20s, early 30s. I had just come off, as I mentioned, I'd worked for the Canadian Prime Minister for a number of years. I was doing a lot of like tour and logistics of travel with him as part of that. I'd left that job and had gone and started a government relations firm with a couple of partners. I did that for about 6 months, and I'm like, this is not for me. I want to be doing something that allows a little bit more travel again, a little bit more excitement. And we'd gone out for dinner one night at a Thai restaurant in Ottawa, and we were kind of talking about wanting to do something different. And the waiter started telling us about this New Year's festival that they do in across Thailand and across a lot of Southeast Asia every year called Songkran. I don't know if you've
Songkran.
been there for that.
Yeah,
but it's
I haven't been there, but I know it. Yeah.
The biggest water fight in the world.
Yes.
It is a tremendous amount of fun, a huge party. And as he was telling us more and more about it, and we're having dinner, we're like, we should really go there. And by the time we had finished the dinner, we had decided to sell our house, sell our car, put everything in storage, and away we went. And then spent the next year exploring all throughout Southeast Asia, and probably about 6 months of that exploring Southeast Asia, doing some volunteer work there, and about 6 months of that living and working in Japan.
Wow. Okay, so I want to go to Southeast Asia first. I've covered it a lot on my podcast. It's a very popular place to travel, but I just love hearing about it. So what would maybe be your top 3 favorite parts of Southeast Asia?
Oh, wow. That's tough. And I've been back more recently to Southeast Asia just this year as well.
Oh, this year? Okay, yeah.
I mean, Thailand is for sure one of my favorite places in the world. From the food to all that you can experience there is incredible. Cambodia was a place that, my perception of it before going and after going really changed dramatically, seeing it. And, Angkor Wat, I don't know if you've had a chance to travel there. Yeah. What did you think of Angkor Wat?
Well, I traveled there first time, must have been my first ever trip abroad, second or third week in. So it's quite a unbelievable occasion, but not many people at that point. That's 2013.
Yeah.
And then I went 5 years later with my now partner, and it was very quiet. So, but what I noticed is that they've got this new, I don't know if you've known this from previous trips, but you've got this new sort of desk thing where you get your tuk-tuk around to this place, they park up, you go to this almost like a modern, I don't know what you call it really, it's like, you queue up, go through tolls, got these booths where you get your ticket. Well, in 2013, that was not such a thing. You speak to your hostel owner and they organise, they get you driver and you go.
Okay.
So this is a big modernisation that I wasn't really expecting. But the place itself was just as good.
It is. I think it's one of the most remarkable places in the world, and I it's well known, but for how good it is, I don't think it's well known enough.
Yes.
I mean, I think it really is one of the wonders of the world.
Yeah.
And so that was definitely, I would say that another favorite in Southeast Asia, and then probably the third would be Bali, Indonesia.
I like Bali.
I love Bali. I mean,
I'm not a fan.
No.
No.
How come? Why not?
I didn't like my experience there. That was horrible. Yeah.
Really?
Stayed a week.
Okay.
Yeah. Never again.
Well, I will say, I mean, I was there
maybe again
15, 16 years ago, and then I was there just before the pandemic as well.
Okay. So
and dramatically different on those two different trips.
I'm really interested in the first time. What was it like back then?
Then it was peaceful, serene. I mean, when you went to Ubud, you would hardly find a car on the street, right? And it was, all these amazing retreats in the hills and rice fields. Now, all that's still there, but there's also 20,000 Instagrammers taking pictures of it, and a traffic jam in the middle of Ubud in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
But it's still got amazing surf beaches. It's still got great food, incredibly friendly people, and one of the things I love is some great resorts and 5-star hotels and things as well. Is definitely part of the attraction of Bali as well.
I think I was put off by the traffic. It's almost like a party destination for Australians in Kuta.
It is.
I stayed in Kuta for a week, so maybe that's not the best place to stay.
It's definitely it's its own thing for sure. It's like a great party destination.
Yeah.
But
I should have got out. Really.
Uluwatu, completely different. Really enjoyed that. Even Ubud, still lots of things that I enjoy there. But I can see if you'd spent a week in Kuta, why it may not be your favorite destination in the world.
Great parties, but I was thinking what it was like was what you experienced 15, 16 years ago. Yeah. But it just didn't turn out that way.
And that always makes a huge difference in travel. Your perception of a place versus what it's like when you arrive. I just had that experience in Nepal here a couple of months ago.
Oh, really?
It was a lot different than I expected.
Okay, we're coming to that. I've been there twice. Let's go for this trip. So one more place in Southeast Asia. You've got Thailand, Bali. You said Angkor Wat.
Cambodia.
Cambodia. Okay. And you went through Australia, New Zealand, Cook Islands and Fiji. Now, the reason I want to touch on that is because that was like a popular route to do and book through a tour company in UK called STA Travel.
Okay.
They're now bust from COVID.
Yeah.
But what they would do is they convinced us to go to Southeast Asia for 3 months, which we said yes to.
Yeah.
Then they parked on top of that Australia. I had a work visa, so I stayed, but my friend went back. Australia, New Zealand, Fiji and Cook Islands. But the Cook Islands we kind of sacked off because we're like, well, isn't Fiji and Cook Islands the same? But I'll come back to that in a minute.
Yeah.
So I went to Australia, New Zealand and Fiji, and I absolutely loved Fiji. I couldn't believe this place existed. And this is before smartphones were really a thing. So what's your experience of maybe like Fiji first?
Well, that was my first big international trip. This is, I turned 18.
Okay.
Was taking off a gap year between, high school and university.
Oh, yeah.
And the deal with my parents was if I did well enough, I would get a plane ticket to anywhere I wanted to go in the world.
Okay.
So I tried to find the most costly ticket at the time, which was a Circle Pacific ticket, which took me to Australia, New Zealand, the Cook Islands, and Fiji. And I managed to get on a program, which I think still exists, called SWAP, Student Work Abroad Program. Where if you were,
they have that in Canada here, like for people coming over here, right?
Yeah,
swap and walk.
I think if you were, it was basically between Commonwealth countries. If you were under 35 years old, you got a year working visa.
Oh yeah, the working visa, work permit. Yeah, that's still going on. Yeah.
So that was what drew me to Australia, and that was just a hugely transformative trip to have a year at 18 years old where, waking up every day and could go anywhere I wanted and do anything I wanted for the first time and on the complete opposite side of the world. It was incredible. And I mean, this is the mid-90s, so this is going back, this is long before people were posting a lot of pictures of Fiji online at the time. But like you, I mean, I found Fiji to be one of the most remarkable places in the world. The Cook Islands, which I haven't been back since that trip, I would put right up there with Fiji 100%. As well.
Yeah.
I have a ton of time for that part of the world. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So you worked in Australia?
I did. I worked at Club Med on Lindeman Island for a while, which I don't think that Club Med is still there. And I worked on a sailboat taking people on tours of the Whitsunday Islands.
Oh, which boat was that?
The Emma Peel 2, it was called. Sailboat.
I went on the Clipper.
Okay.
Have you had the Clipper?
I think I remember the Clipper from when I was there.
It was good fun, but I kind of regretted it. It's all it was partying. I was like, I really don't actually want to see the surrounding area.
Yeah.
Which sounds a bit crazy, but yeah, there's loads of boats. That was the one we chose. But being young, just pick the party boat. And
that was a pretty good gig. I mean, that was basically, there were two people who worked on the boat: the captain who sailed the boat, and me, who my job was basically to do the cooking, the cleaning, snorkel tours, and make sure everybody had a good time for
That's amazing.
10 days on the boat. And when you're 18 years old, that's a pretty good gig.
Australia's one of my favourite countries. It's up there because I lived there and I just always talk about it. New Zealand is also up there.
Yeah.
I mean, what a place to road trip that is.
For sure. And definitely some similarities with Canada, I think, in terms of like incredible natural environment. Great, it's a place where I did a lot of hiking and bungee jumping and, rafting tours, things like that. Yeah.
Did you do the Kiwi experience?
I did.
Oh, same. Okay, yeah.
Are they still going, the Kiwi experience?
It is, yeah.
Wow.
It's still going. Yeah.
That was super cool. I mean, I managed to get lucky where I rolled into New Zealand, and I had two fortuitous things that happened when I arrived. One was Air New Zealand was selling, and because I was flying on Air New Zealand, I could buy tickets to a Paul McCartney concert that was in town that was completely sold out.
Yeah.
I was super happy about that. That was my first day. And then I got to my hostel, and there was a guy who had done I think he had like a 30-day Kiwi experience pass, and he'd only done 5 days of it and had to go home for whatever reason. So I bought it for half the price it would normally be, and it was awesome. That was a great trip. Yeah.
I always think back to that Kiwi experience because that is a pretty magical time because you're hopping off a bus, you'll hopefully become friends.
Yeah.
You do these amazing experiences, so you kind of get closer because of that. There's nights out in there. There's probably a bit of drama as well.
Yeah.
It's quite a cool 3 or 4 weeks, isn't it?
It would have made a great reality
New
show.
Zealand.
It would have made a great reality show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it was good fun.
Yeah, amazing. I still speak to some people today actually from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like over 10 years ago now. Cook Islands. I lived in Australia for a year, then I met my partner and we went to New Zealand. That was our first place to live abroad.
Okay.
And part of that was, we have to go Cook Islands because I kind of said no years ago.
The first time around, yeah.
So we booked, I think, 10 days to go to Rarotonga and Atutaki.
Yeah.
And when I got to Atutaki, I could not believe what I was seeing.
Yeah.
Like that clear water, turquoise blue, no one on the beaches really apart from, I guess, the tourists and some locals. But I just couldn't believe that was paradise. I thought that was paradise. I thought I'd actually reached it.
I think you're right. I mean, it was 20 plus years ago that I was there now, but it was untouched. I mean, it basically had one international flight a week at that time coming in via Air New Zealand.
One a week?
Yeah.
Wowzers.
And it was remote. It was untouched. It was still a lot of people living by subsistence agriculture. And,
okay. Yeah.
I think there wasn't a single chain hotel on the islands at the time. It was all just locally owned small resorts.
Yeah.
And the best snorkeling and diving I'd ever seen anywhere in the world. Right. I mean, you put your face in the water and you were surrounded by amazing sea life everywhere, and like you say, some of the clearest water you could ever find.
Did you go to Atutaki or stay in Rarotonga?
I was just in Rarotonga. I was on Rarotonga for probably about 2 weeks. And,
oh, wow.
And that was at the very tail end of my year-long backpacking, around the South Pacific. So I was running out of money. So I didn't make it to Atutaki that time around. But it's funny. The Cook Islands has, since then, always been at the top of my list of somewhere to go back to, but so many other destinations around the world, I still haven't made it back.
Yeah. So this year trip at the age of 18 is Australia, New Zealand, Cook Islands, Fiji, and Hawaii.
That's right.
And is there any other islands in the South Pacific you've popped to as well?
Not on that trip, but
No.
I've been to the South Pacific many times. Yeah.
I just want to touch on Fiji. What I couldn't believe when I went there in 2013, bear in mind, I do talk about this time because it's kind of before social media and smartphones really.
Yeah.
It was still like going to hostel, logging on computer, logging on Facebook and doing an update. Still that sort of thing. But even then I thought Fiji was backwards in terms of that because there's no internet.
Yeah.
No internet. You can pay by credit card, cash preferred.
Yeah.
And you kind of get told what to do or not do. You can't go and just wander to a shop. You can't go out for an excursion because you have to wait for them, the people who stayed at the resorts, who run the resorts.
Yeah.
You're on their time,
I
guess the island time, but on Fiji time. And that's quite a different way of traveling because up to that point, we've been wandering around Southeast Asia on the Kiwi experience.
Yeah.
And now, we're kind of stuck on this island for 4 days until the ferry comes.
Until the next ferry comes through. And then make
completely different vibe.
Yeah.
Is that what you experienced as well?
Yeah, I mean, I would say our most recent trip to Fiji, it's certainly a lot more developed than that now. There's great internet and you can get around fairly easily, but it is still a very very laid back place.
Yeah.
And it's, one story I remember is we were there probably almost exactly 10 years ago. And, we went into a local shop and we lost my daughter for about 5 minutes. We were quite like, whoa, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And she'd been, playing with some local toys, trying on local dresses, and a couple of local women had just like taken her along and then introduced her to all the local kids, and they were all out playing. And anywhere else in the world, you would have been like horrified. But there, it was just like, that's just how Fiji. Like, people were so friendly, so welcoming, super laid back place. I think everybody should go to Fiji at least once in their life. Absolutely.
100%. Yeah. We kind of went there for one night with my partner. I think in between. I can't remember now. But it was a stopover essentially, so she didn't get to see Fiji. So I do have to take her back there because it is incredible, and you can go off grid if you want to for 2 weeks. Yeah. Still now, I think, so that's great.
Did you ever do? One of the things we did, probably my favorite experience in Fiji, was a company which unfortunately is going out of business, I think, this month, called Captain Cook Cruises, that used to do.
Oh yeah, is that the
cruises to very remote islands all throughout the island chains in Fiji? You would go on this small ship with 40, 50 guests and do sort of anywhere from 5 to 7 night cruises around more remote islands in Fiji. That was an amazing experience.
Well,
I think there's still a competing company, I think, that does, I can't remember the name, that does it as well. But
is that the same as just a generic cruise travel in between the islands, or is that separate?
No, this one you're actually staying on the boat.
Oh, okay, no,
right?
we didn't.
And it's like a cruise ship, but a small cruise ship. Yeah,
they're not the same company who I went to one of the islands. I can't remember what it's called. Where they had like a little mini submarine, and you walk onto it, and they sort of go not too far down, but like just beneath the water, and that is incredible because like you look at the windows, there's fish just flying here, and it's just like a little submarine just going around underneath the water. Did you do that?
I didn't do that, but I think you're right. It's either them or the other cruise company in Fiji.
And it's yellow, of course, because of the Beatles Yellow Submarine. But yeah, that was a interesting experience because we got kicked off an island for one night.
Yeah,
we went to I can't remember the islands. I think it's called Small Island or something. It's literally a 5-minute walk around the island. But some company had bought that for a night after we booked it.
Yeah.
So management sort of come and said, look, hey, there's actually an event now going on this day and this night. You've all been taken to another island. And this was like one of the resort islands.
Yeah.
And we got to stay in this resort for one night, which is incredible because we're kind of backpacking at that point. But that was part of that package, was we get to go in this little submarine. So that's why that happened. But
very cool.
Very different experience from going to like maybe the budget islands to this like huge resort, lots of Americans, lots of families.
Yeah.
It's like a different vibe.
For sure.
Yeah, but amazing. Okay, I want to touch on Japan actually. So I want to also touch on the Ship for World Youth Program because that seems quite an interesting story. Again, it includes Japan and some more islands.
Yeah.
Talk us through what that scheme is.
Well, that was something I did in my sort of mid-20s, a program through the Japanese Prime Minister's office that they organize every annually or semi-annually, where they basically bring together 300 youth from around the world, between ages of 18 and 35. Every year they select sort of a different cohort of countries that they invite to send over a delegation to Japan. You spend a few weeks learning about Japanese culture, Japanese history. Then they basically take all of those delegates from around the world, pair them together with an equal number of Japanese youth of the same age, put you all together on a cruise ship, together with lecturers from the United Nations University in Tokyo. And you basically spent the next, I think it was 4 months, traveling around the world together. And, you're taking sort of university-style classes, but you're also expected to teach classes about your own, whatever your expertise is, or your country. The participants are really responsible for planning kind of 80% of the programming when you're on board. And we went, from Japan to the Solomon Islands, Tonga, Tahiti, Ecuador, Mexico, and Hawaii. And other than Mexico and Hawaii, every country we went to, we met with like the head of state in that country. They had these amazing, receptions for us as the boat arrived. It was a really unique experience, and the network of people who you get to meet through that experience, I mean, they're lifelong friends who I continue to see on trips around the world all the time, continue to be in touch with on a weekly or monthly basis. It was incredible.
And that scheme's still going?
It is. It was probably about 5-6 years ago. It was a bit in jeopardy where the Japanese economy wasn't doing as well, and the Prime Minister's office had looked at winding it down. But it's created this, it's been a huge success in terms of soft diplomacy for Japan, because a lot of the alumni of the ship have gone on, in some cases, to be leaders in their countries around the world, or heads of companies in places around the world. So I think Japan has continued to see the value in it, and has continued to do it.
How did you apply to go on it?
It was just an open call. It was when a thing in my sister saw it in the Globe and Mail and said, "Hey, you should apply for this." And I went in and applied. And now, being an alumni of the program, you get to help be on the selection committee for all the delegations that continue to go from Canada going forward. If you want, you can participate in that as well.
Sounds an incredible experience. I never knew it existed.
For sure. It's a very cool experience. I mean, Japan has a lot of great exchange programs. The JET program, where they let people come over and teach English in Japan,
sure.
I think is still going. But I would say the Ship for World Youth is really sort of their flagship international exchange program, and a great experience.
Okay, we'll come to Japan because you lived there as well in a bit, but quickly on this trip, I mean, what is the Solomon Islands like?
Solomon Islands is a very cool spot. I mean, it's somewhere that you still saw. You could still see a lot of the impacts of World War II there, right? I mean, you had all these shipwrecks all around the island. It was somewhere that's still, it's still a very remote destination. Not a lot of travelers there, and not a lot of development in terms of tourism infrastructure. At least when I was there, but a naturally beautiful place, great snorkeling, great diving again, like a Fiji or some of the other places that we've talked about. And one of the things that stands out in my mind, I remember being with the delegation from the Solomon Islands in Tokyo, and them experiencing Tokyo for the first time was wild. Because,
I can imagine.
They would see these massive cranes and skyscrapers, and just like they couldn't even comprehend what they were seeing when they first arrived.
Yeah.
Or when we had fireworks on the boat and they all dove under the table. It was a very eye-opening experience for their delegation, for sure.
I do wonder about that sort of experience, because I thought that in Nepal last year, which we'll come to in a second. But when I was with my guide doing one of the hikes, and he's never been out of Nepal, I was like, imagine if you just dropped him into somewhere like Tokyo or New York. Like, what does the reaction be? Because it's so different. Langtang Valley, Kathmandu is very different, right? Yeah. You just can't imagine. That is obviously a culture shock for them, I guess.
Absolutely. And you saw some of those delegates from the Solomon Islands then, I know of at least, of their delegation of 10, I think at least 3 of them ended up spending the rest of their lives in Japan.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because they were just, once they'd gotten the bug and sort of seen something so different from what they'd experienced the rest of their life, they were hooked, for sure.
I think a lot of people have been hooked to Japan, One quick question about another country there is Tahiti, or French Polynesia, whatever you call it. That is on my sort of bucket list in terms of that's somewhere down the line, somewhere else, because it seems such a long way to go, expensive, and just idyllic. Probably a bit like Cook Islands, but to a different level. Is that what it is? Did you go to the classic Bora Bora and stuff like that? Yeah, I mean, we only had a day there, really, on the ship, but that day was phenomenal, right? I mean, I remember getting together with some of the other delegates. We quickly rented a rental car, got out to this amazing waterfall in the mountains that you could swim in with, just beautiful views of the beaches and mountains around. It's a place that not only great diving, but great surfing as well. Sure. And because of the French influence, great food as well, which you don't often found. Some of the other South Pacific islands are not known for their necessarily as great dining destinations. Where I found Tahiti, the food was phenomenal there. So if you like Fiji, you like the Cook Islands, you would love Tahiti. Yeah. I think for me, it's always been an obsession from young. I don't know why. I watched when I was really, really, really young, Tom and Jerry. Yeah. And there's an episode where they go to Hawaii. Okay. I don't even remember that episode if you ever watched it. And when I heard that Hawaiian music, and I know it's cartoon, you see the palm tree in the sand, I was like, is there anyone that actually exists like that? So that's always been in my mind. Yeah. So I think the journey from that, 6-7-year-old to now is trying to find paradise. That's why I was obsessed with Cook Islands. Yeah. So I thought, maybe I've reached it. But I think I'm still on the quest, because I'm like, how can you know unless you've been to, not everywhere, but a lot of places. It sounds like we have a lot of the same travel inspiration there, James, for sure. And next year on my YouTube, I was like, I'm going to do like an island theme for the year, because lots of islands around Vancouver, right? So, and I'm going to a few islands abroad next year. I'm like, okay, let's do an island themed year and see what I can find. But that's part of the thinking as well. Okay, and Japan. Yep. Absolutely love the place. I think I've been, once, for a month. So I went on the Shinkansen for a month. Okay. Dotting around the country. that is a crazy place in terms of trying to comprehend how it all works. I remember going to Osaka thinking, I don't know what's the middle ground in terms of, are we level here? Is there somewhere underneath?
Yeah.
There's something above? I'm like, this is crazy. So where did you live in Japan, and what was your first experiences?
Well, my first experience was that exchange program, the Ship for World Youth. And the good part about that is that gave me such a grounding then, in Japanese culture, in Japanese history, living with, this delegation of Japanese youth who I got to travel around the world with, taught me so much about Japan that then I was fortunate to be able to return back there a couple times when I was working in the Prime Minister's office in politics, a couple times when I was working in PR, and then a few times just on personal travel. So altogether, it's probably been about 10, 12 times to Japan. And the longest of that was the 6 months where my wife and I lived in Tokyo. And that's actually where I started my podcast for the first time, was when we were living in Tokyo.
So what, 2005?
2005 or 6? Yeah, end of 2005, beginning of 2006. So.
Tokyo is a crazy place, isn't it?
It is. I often describe it to people. To me, it's like a 1950s vision of the future come to life. With this a whole other cultural aspect as well. It's bizarre and wonderful, and it inspired me to do a podcast. And I could have spent, I think, from then until now just podcasting in Tokyo, and easily had enough content to do a weekly show about just Tokyo. I mean, it is. And I don't know there's any other place in the world that I can say that about.
It's a good question, actually. Yeah, when you think about it.
I remember my wife and I, we would often get up, any day we weren't working, we would pick a random subway stop. We would go there and just explore. And every time it was like a different city, different country that we were arriving in. There was just so much variety there. It's amazing.
Wow. Well, one of the biggest travel YouTubers is abroad in Japan, right?
Yeah.
So I think people are just intrigued about what it is like to live there and be there for a long time. And what you said there's so much content you could do. I mean, no wonder he's keep on going because, like you say, you can pick one tiny little area on a metro station in Tokyo alone.
Yeah.
Forget the rest of the country, and that's a YouTube episode in itself, right? Did
you experience a lot of culture shock being there? I mean, it is like stepping onto another planet in many ways.
Yeah, like a different type of culture shock though. Bangkok was the first culture shock.
Yeah.
Because I've never been anywhere else apart from Australia and England and bits of Europe, but that was the first culture shock. India was another culture shock.
Yeah.
But in a totally different way. Maybe more culture shock in terms of how poor it looked.
Yeah.
And how it is literally in front of your face, the homelessness and people begging and stuff.
Yeah.
But Japan was the other thing, culture shock, but how futuristic it looked. I'm like, I don't understand what's happening here.
Yeah.
My friend calls it, he goes all the time, he says, it is this organised chaos. But there's a pattern to it, but we can't really comprehend it because we're not used to it.
Yeah.
So it's a very strange phenomena, I think.
And just the way the whole society is organized and managed themselves is so different than here. There's so much of a focus on the collective good rather than the individual good. And that impacts everything that they do, and how everything you see is impacted by that.
That's nice to see as well, because we can be a bit individualistic.
We could learn a bit from Japan.
Yeah, I think we can.
Yes.
I've interviewed Matthew Baxter on the podcast, who lives there in Japan and Tokyo. He's been there 5 years, and he's written a few books about it. But he says Japan, you get to the 4 year mark. So you stay in Japan, the initial hit is great, you do your job, then you sort of realise that working in Japan is quite hard. It's quite hardcore.
Yep.
Long hours, proper hours, proper work ethic and all that sort of stuff. And then you sort of question it at 4 or 5 years. And he said, I had to just go to Australia, New Zealand just to see something different. And then he went back to Japan.
Yeah.
So I think you do get to a point, if you're going to live there long term, where you do need to go somewhere else to make sure you're going to miss it. And most people do go back, I think.
I remember learning about the working culture there during that 6 months that we were living in Tokyo. My wife found a job first, and she was working with Hyatt hotels there, setting up an international sales team for them. But she was working in an entirely Japanese team. I started my podcast, was cruising around Tokyo doing that, and then I landed a job probably 2 months later with the Canadian Embassy, and that was a much different environment, where her working in that fully Japanese environment, they had rules like, the color her hair needed, not just the length of her hair, the color her hair needed to be. They had like sleeping pods where if there was a extra difficult job to be done, then you stayed over at the hotel in the basement in the sleeping pod, and then you were back to work later that day, and it was just so entirely different than working culture here, for sure.
That's for sure. Yeah, I know TikTok can be hit and miss, but I saw TikTok last night randomly about Japan. I think it's Tokyo as well, actually. Some person said they were late for work. So they're TikToking as they go. I think this person had an alarm for 5 a.m. and wasn't at the metro until 9, so he's well late.
Yeah.
And he tells the story that he got there late. Everyone ignored him for the day. And then at the end of the day, he got a written warning for being late and tasked with more work just because he was late.
Yeah.
And he's just saying, this is really hardcore, you can't do this again.
Yeah.
But what I found fascinating is that the collective are ignoring him.
Yes.
Like, if someone on my team came late, I'm like, it's not really a thing, is it?
Yeah.
It's not a big thing, but I guess it's the collective there.
For sure. That responsibility to the collective is such a big thing as part of Japanese.
How dare you sleep in when we have to get in at 7 a.m.
Everyone else has to work harder than.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Did you visit much else of Japan around that 6 months? Or I guess you've been back many times.
A little bit, and I've been back many times as well. So, I mean, like you have done the Shinkansen for a couple of weeks, traveling up to Kyoto and Osaka and Nara and Fukuoka. I haven't got to... One of the things I haven't done is I've done more to the south of Japan. I'd really like to get to the north. I'd love to go skiing there at some point.
Sapporo, up there?
Not yet.
Yeah. My friend lives up there, yeah. I was actually going to visit him when we were there, but then an earthquake happened.
Yeah.
And he said, don't come. So,
yeah.
Okay, fair enough. He said, only McDonald's is open. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, we went south as well. Did you go to Nagasaki and Hiroshima?
I did. No, that was very impactful experience, obviously seeing...
Yeah, you've done the atomic stuff, yeah. Yeah, that's quite a awful thing to read, actually, isn't it? When you actually get down there and you can see some of the buildings that are still there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, crazy. What I found crazy about Japan is the contrast in budget. I don't know if you found this. So Shinkansen can be expensive for foreigners. But then day to day, if you go and get your breakfast from a shop, you can get those like little sandwiches and it comes really cheap. Yeah. So I couldn't get my handle on, is this an expensive place or not? What do you think?
I mean, there definitely is both ends of the spectrum. I mean, I remember that 6 months we were living there, we lived in an apartment near Ginza, which is one of the most expensive districts in Tokyo. And it was, I think at the time we were paying about $3,500 US a month for a place that's about as big as the room we're recording in right now. It's a very, very small apartment. So that was, obviously very costly. But then food was less than what we were paying in Canada or going out with friends and stuff. So, it's just, there's all ends of the spectrum in Japan, I think, for sure.
Okay. You mentioned before in this podcast that you've worked with the Prime Minister of Canada.
Yeah.
That's quite a cool thing to say. How'd you get into that, and also what was your job?
It was a very cool gig. It was, right out of university. I'd been quite active politically in sort of university clubs and stuff, and volunteering on campaigns. And as I was getting ready to graduate, I really wanted to work with the Canadian Foreign Service, and I wrote the Foreign Service exam. And I think the year that I wrote, there were literally tens of thousands of people who wrote the exam, and they hired maybe 8 that year. I did not make the 8.
Yeah, okay, right, okay.
but I did, as part of that, I had been doing a lot of volunteering and work on political campaigns, and was offered a job, a summer job, working on the guy Paul Martin, who at the time was our finance minister, to be basically a summer student in his office. When that summer ran out, his former chief of staff had taken a job with the World Bank in Washington. His former advisor for Western Canada became the chief of staff and asked me if I wanted to stay on as the Western Canadian advisor.
Wow!
Which for a first job with a poli-sci degree out of Alberta was a pretty good gig. And I was working both as a policy advisor, but also as part of political jobs in Canada. I mean, most elected officials have pretty small staff, so you're also doing a lot of tour logistics, planning of travel. I was doing a lot of that, doing a lot of the travel around the world with him. And then when he decided to run for leader of the party, I was director of operations on his national campaign, and then became the senior advisor for Northern and Western Canada in the Prime Minister's office as well. So it was a pretty good run. It was good fun.
And lots of travel.
Tons of travel. I mean, I was lucky that, one of the things that was great about traveling with Paul is that, he worked incredibly hard. But also when we arrived in a new destination, if he found out, there was a iceberg in the harbor in Newfoundland, he's like, okay, we got an hour between these meetings. Let's go check out the iceberg.
Oh, that's what
so
you want.
Would wander down and go check out the iceberg. And so he loved traveling with me. And as a result, I did a lot of the international travel. I went to Germany, to Japan, to China. And because he was sort of the perceived prime minister in waiting at the time when he was finance minister, we would be treated very, very well. You know,
Okay,
we
right.
arrived in Japan, in Beijing. They shut down the Forbidden City for me and him to go on tour for the day. It was pretty remarkable. Some pretty unique and wild travel experiences for sure.
Okay. I'm not an expert in Canadian politics, but I guess he didn't make it as leader.
Well, he got elected prime minister. He made it through one successful election into a minority government.
Yeah.
And that's when I then, so at that point I'd been working with him for about 7 years. That's when I sort of resigned and decided to go start a government relations firm with some partners. He then made it through to one more election. And that was happening when we were in Japan, and that's actually why I came back, was to help him on that final election.
Okay.
We didn't win that one, so
Can't win them all.
That's
okay. And it's big for Canada because I think next year is the general election, right?
that's right. Yeah, well, it could be another one. We're back in a minority government situation.
Yeah,
so
of course.
it could be one any day here. That's right.
I'm not quite a citizen yet. I'm nearly there.
There you go.
To see how that works out with timings. But I think there's going to be something different by the looks of it. Right, I've got some more stuff here on your list, on your resume, that I'd like to go through. One thing that kind of tickled me a little bit was the campaign led for the Best Travel and Tourism campaign in 2012. So, what is this campaign? And might sound a weird question. Why was it the best, do you think?
Well, how that came about was, post politics, I went to work in PR and ended up running a PR firm here in Vancouver that had offices all around the world, doing a lot of work with travel clients. So working with people like Tourism Australia, Emirates, and one of our longest standing clients, one that I probably worked with the most, was Destination British Columbia. Helping them promote tourism abroad. And this was sort of post the 2010 Olympics, I think in, I forget what year it was now, 2012 I guess, where they were really looking to sort of capitalize on that post-Olympic interest in Vancouver. And Air Canada had just opened up some new routes between Vancouver and San Francisco. And the ad agency that was working for Destination BC at the time came up with an idea that they were calling 100 BC moments, which was basically like 100 different unique experiences that you could have in BC. And they asked my agency to come up with the PR component of that and what we could do in San Francisco to sort of pique interest in traveling here. So we came up with the idea, myself and our team, of creating this giant sort of 15-foot high vending machine that just, this was, as social media was just really becoming a big thing, and San Francisco was really the hub of that. So our idea was, can we do something that will kind of surprise and delight people in the middle of San Francisco they're not expecting, that will capture some buzz and interest in traveling to BC? So we created this massive vending machine that we dropped into the busiest public square in the middle of San Francisco one morning, that people could go up and choose, any one of these 100 BC moments from the vending machine, and something related to that moment would come out. So, for example, if you picked, golfing at the Jack Nicklaus designed golf course in Whistler, you might get a sleeve of customized golf balls. But if you chose, mountain biking in Fernie, a mountain bike might come out, or 2 tickets to get you there, or whatever. It was all different things that would come out of the vending. We had like 6 people inside the vending machine, a number of us outside the vending machine. We invited every sort of blogger in San Francisco at the time to come check it out, and every YouTuber, and so it got massive social media coverage. And as a result, I mean, we could see a clear uptake in those direct flights between BC and San Francisco, that bookings increased. And we also, gave away a discount on flights, and lots of people who booked using that. So it had a real impact on travel that year to BC, and went on to win all kinds of PR shows and around the world.
That's amazing. And kind of relating to that, in BC, have you traveled much?
A ton. I mean, from right when I was young, this was the place that my family always came on our family vacations. And then having, lived here now for a little over a decade, every chance we get, we're traveling somewhere new in BC.
What's some of your favorite spots?
I mean, one of the places that really impressed me that we went during the pandemic was Alert Bay. I don't know if you've been up there, on just off of the sort of north of Vancouver Island.
Oh no, we've been up to, is it Port Hardy?
Not sure.
We drove up there last year on the island, Port Hardy.
Oh, Port Hardy, yes, of course.
And we were going to do, there's stuff on the west coast that I saw on social media, but it's actually a dirt road. It's not like a paved road, so we didn't go in the end, but kind of been up that way.
Yeah, Yeah, well, this Alert Bay is sort of on your way to Port Hardy.
Yes, because I keep thinking I saw it on a sign somewhere.
But you have to take a ferry to get there.
Got it.
And
okay.
it had elements of sort of Angkor Wat like elements to it, right? It's covered with all these traditional First Nations artifacts, totem poles and long houses, and it's got an amazing museum. I love it. I thought it was a great destination. That whole North Vancouver Island, as you say, there's some great beaches that are only accessible by dirt road there. Yeah. There's some really cool caves you can explore up there. So I really enjoy North Vancouver Island.
Our mini camper is only a Toyota Sienna, so we couldn't risk. That's the start of our road trip across Canada, right?
Yeah.
So we couldn't risk going on that road and getting a tyre, so we just stuck to Port Hardy. But I'll tell you what was a nice little find on Vancouver Island was Telegraph Cove.
Yeah.
I never knew it existed. We thought, what is that? And then this lovely little enclave of just like some restaurants. It was sort of boardwalk along the water. It was very misty when we went there.
Yeah.
We do whale watching there as well. Very nice.
We tend to find a lot of people who love travel from around the world do end up here, right, in British Columbia.
Sure.
And you can certainly see why, right? There's a lot to explore here.
Yeah, we started our trip in Tofino. I mean, that's a classic.
Yeah.
Classic. And tell you one place I've not been to that's on my list, Haida Gwaii.
Yeah.
Have you been there?
I haven't yet. It is very high on my list
very
as well.
High.
Yeah. I think that would be an amazing place to experience. And I've seen some really cool boat trips you can do up there where you can do multi days sort of exploring throughout the region. But
I think the north part of the islands you can drive, there's roads, but the southern part you can't, right? So you have to get boats. Just looks incredible.
Yeah. And I've just discovered recently too, when we were looking at planning a trip there last summer, there are some surf beaches up that way too. So
God, amazing. Okay, and we've got here maybe 5-10 more minutes. Let's finish the travel resume with Scotland.
Yeah.
Your last name is definitely Scottish, as I mentioned as you came in.
Yeah.
Which part of Scotland is your family from?
Well, the town of Brodie is our last name there. Brodie Castle there is somewhere that we went and explored a bit. But I think most of my ancestors are actually from closer to Glasgow, just outside of Glasgow.
Okay, yeah. And do you feel Scottish?
Probably more after having done that trip.
Okay.
I mean, it was went over together with my mom and sister and niece over and spent some time there. And really tried to dig into our family history a fair bit and look up the genealogy of where all of our ancestors were from. And one really cool experience was our family castle, Brodie Castle. I'd had a number of relatives who had visited over the years and had sent back pictures and told stories about it. But as I was researching, I'd found out just in the last few years, they've essentially converted about half of the castle into like an Airbnb that you can rent, and it was actually quite affordable, and that was awesome to stay in our family castle there for a few nights.
God, that's amazing. Yeah. Scotland is a special place, isn't it?
It certainly is. It's we had about 2 weeks there, and I could definitely do a ton more. There was not nearly. It was just really a taste of it. There's so much to explore there.
Yeah, never really done it apart from Edinburgh, so need to go back big time. My friend who used to live here on the island, actually, he's got a Airbnb north of Aberdeen.
Okay.
Right on the 500 road.
Yeah.
And his view out of his house is the water and then the beach as it goes down.
Wow.
But he's converted a garage into two sort of like very comfortable Airbnb. So if you go, let me know and I'll put you in contact.
I've got an Airbnb here just in Ladder too. So
we could do a swap. Yeah. Yeah, I need to go to this place. It's quite new. It's amazing. Okay, we're going to finish the episode with Voyascape Network and your podcast as well. You started, as you mentioned before, in 2005. So that is OG status in terms of podcasts, isn't it?
It certainly is. It was me and I don't know if you've ever come across Chris Christensen from the Amateur Traveler.
Sure, yeah.
But me and him also off to talk about. I think we were the first two travel podcasts on the Apple Podcasts store back in 2005, 2006, and I think Chris beat me by just a few weeks. Yeah.
Well, there's a podcast there who's now moved here called Helen Zaltzman.
Okay.
And she started in 2006. So she's, like in UK terms, is like the OG as well. But she's now based here. She has actually a meetup on Sunday. But she's quite funny because she was telling me, one of my questions coming in a minute is, I was like, how do you start in 2005? Because there's no smartphones, no social media really at all, I don't think. And I can't quite remember, but was that like iTunes was starting to come in?
It had just, that's how I started it. We were living in Ginza at the time, where the biggest Apple store in Tokyo.
Okay.
And I remember being there the day that they released the first iPod.
Oh, right, okay. Oh, wow.
So was checking that out and saw, well, they've got these podcasts on there. And my idea initially was, as I was walking around exploring Tokyo, I was thinking, it'd be great to have something you could listen to on your iPod that sort of told you more about the city.
Yeah.
And I thought, nobody's doing this. Why don't I start doing like 10 minutes every week about things to see and do in Tokyo? And then that evolved from, as we left Tokyo and traveled more around the world to start incorporating other destinations as well.
So have you done it regularly, or is that quite sparingly?
Very irregularly, to be honest. So, while my wife and I were living in Tokyo there and started it, I did a ton of episodes there initially, and as we sort of continued to travel throughout Southeast Asia. Then we moved back to Canada, and I probably didn't do anything for a year or two. But I was seeing, even in years where I wouldn't update the podcast at all, it would still get 20,000, 30,000 downloads. So I'm like, there's an audience here. I should try and keep this up. But because I was so busy in my professional career, I kept it up very sporadically. I would do a few episodes here, a few episodes there. And it was really this year where I partnered together with Tim Johnson, a travel writer who I met during some of my work in PR, that Tim and I were saying, we should do something together, and we should do something with this thing. And we decided to first relaunch the podcast, but then also saw that there was a real opportunity to build out a podcast network in the travel space. There's a ton of podcast networks out there that are doing really well, but nobody who's really done it that we had seen yet, at least in the travel space, who was really sort of dominating that space. And we thought there's a ton of opportunity there to be able to create educational content, stuff that's going to inspire people, that's going to educate them, and so that's what we've really been building out over the last few months, and just started to launch this summer.
Yes, and that's interesting because I mentioned before we start recording, my friend Ted, who lives in Quebec, he's a travel podcaster as well. We both had the same discussion about a podcast network. We just thought, there's not actually a travel-specific one out there. And I think, isn't travel podcasts, they're never going to be competing with the classic genres of true crime, news, sport, entertainment, right? Because
I hope they are. I aspire to have more people. I do aspire to have more people listening to where to travel next, rather than listening to who's killed who.
That's what I like to think. But maybe one day. Yeah, maybe we should work on that together. Yeah,
cool. And it's interesting too. Just since we started this, I've seen some of the really large podcast networks that are out there. People like Barstool Sports just launched a travel podcast yesterday. Yeah. And I forget the name of the network, but Tom Segura, the comedian who's got a whole series of podcasts he launched. They had one of the comedians, Ari, I'm forgetting his last name now, but who just launched a travel podcast a few weeks ago. So they're clearly seeing some opportunity in the travel space. And I think it's, coming out of the pandemic, travel has just continued to boom. And I think audio is just a great medium to be able to inspire people when it comes to travel, and to help give them very accessible information on how to travel more and travel better.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting combination, because we always assume travel with YouTube, right? And rightly so, you can show YouTube what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you can narrate whatever you need to do. But I think there is a space for travel podcasts for what you just said about giving information. Travel in 10 as your podcast name. So in 10 minutes, I'm going to hear a specific thing.
Yeah.
But I think there's a middle part, which I'm sort of veering towards with my trip coming in November, where I want to do like an immersive audio experience where you sort of get the sounds from the location. You do the odd narrating over the top, some information, but not too hardcore, not too much speech, but there's enough. You got some sound.
It's a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
I've often wondered, is there an audience for an immersive travel podcast that is nothing but just the sounds of the sort of an AMSR type podcast?
Yeah. Well, there's
the
a
sounds
few
of different destinations around the world.
Yeah. Armchair Explorer. I think Portia Jones on Travel Goals, she does that as well.
That's a fair bit of that, yeah.
I bet, but those are the only two I can think off the top of my head. Far From Home from Scott Gurian. He's a great podcast as well, but he's very season-based, right? Which is fine. But I think they're the ones I can.
They all still do. There's still like storytelling and commentary, though. I wonder if there's an audience for just pure immersive audio. It's just, here's half an hour on the streets of New York, or here's a half hour.
Like no speaking?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting concept.
Because you think of some of those types of AMSR videos on YouTube that do really well. I don't know if there would be an audience for that in the podcasting space or not. But
I'll tell you another idea my friend came up with. See what you think about this very quickly before we wrap up. He's like, why don't you create a podcast episode for, let's say, West Vancouver, right? And you have a start point. So you say, right, you listen to this podcast episode, you've got to start here. So maybe like Marine Drive and Fifth, whatever. and you says you time how long it takes you to walk to places, and that's your timing on the podcast to explain what you're seeing as you go.
Yeah.
Has that come across? Is that an idea? Has that been done or not?
That was exactly my idea when I first started Travel in 10 in Tokyo, was to do exactly that. But I just found, for me, the logistics of that and the technology weren't really, I think that now that would be much easier to produce that type of show. And I know there's a few apps that do exactly that.
Yeah,
actually.
Of course. Yeah.
But I do think there's totally an audience there for that type of like very audio tours, essentially, right? I mean,
essentially an audio tour, yeah.
But there aren't. I mean, I've seen some people dabble in that in the podcast space, but there's certainly nobody who's done a big catalog of that type of show, and I think it could do great.
All right, yeah, you can get the audio immersive stuff in there as well.
Absolutely,
something to think about. Okay, so to wrap up, can you tell listeners and viewers where they can find your podcast and your network, websites and social medias?
For sure. Well, our main podcast, Travel in 10, you can find on iTunes, on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. But you can find that and really all the podcasts we're bringing together from around the world, all the travel content that we've got at voyascape.com.
Okay, and what's coming up for the podcast out of interest this year, going into next year?
Yeah, so we've got Travel in 10 that Tim and I relaunched earlier this year, where we're doing weekly shows now, a different destination each week. One thing we're finding really challenging is now that it's got, with a co-host, 10 minutes is a constraining format. So it ends up being more like 10 minutes each or 10 minutes-ish. But
can you change it to 10 minutes-ish? Travel in 10 minutes-ish?
I think I'll have to put that qualifier in our show description, because we do go over the 10 minutes often. But our idea with that show is just to give people that quick, why to travel a destination, and then really get into the practicals of where to stay, what to do, what to eat, of our experience having, Tim having traveled to 150 plus countries around the world.
Oh, wow.
Me with 50 some countries, trying to bring that practical experience to people. We're then have just started taping a new show that we're doing that's going to be more longer form interview style, that we're probably going to do as a limited series, where we've got a few really interesting travelers from around the world that we've lined up to do that sort of longer form, more inspirational type content we're calling journey telling. And then we're also experimenting a little bit with AI podcasts as well. And where I thought AI, and I wanted to make sure in doing an AI podcast that we were using AI ethically, and I was really trying to think of how best to do that. And to me, a medium and format that I thought could work really well is sleep stories. So we're looking at doing a series of travel-focused sleep stories that will be all destinations that our editorial team has been to, all focusing on real places, real destinations, and still giving you practical travel advice, but in the format of an AI-generated sleep story.
Sounds amazing.
Because I think AI voice can be kind of boring, so we thought it would work well for a sleep story. So we're going to experiment a little bit with that and see where that goes. And then we're talking to a bunch of independent podcasters to look at how we can bring them into the network to really, our goal is to help independent travel podcasters. We're really trying to find those who are putting together high quality, educational content that's going to help inspire people, help them travel better is really our mission. And, trying to bring it together as much of that type of content as we can in one network where people will be able to find it all in the same place. On our new channel we've launched on the Apple Podcast Store at Voyascape, on our website, and also for my experience working with a lot of advertisers in my work in PR, knowing that they're also looking for that, to be able to, it can be hard for a travel brand to work with a single influencer, whether that's a YouTuber or Instagrammer, right, versus going to a collective that all are creating the same type of content, the same quality of content, is a lot more appealing from a brand perspective. So using some of those contacts that I've built in the travel industry to try and connect them with independent travel podcasters.
It's amazing. I think we both have the same ideas and same values really with the podcast. I think I just see storytelling as a great way to inspire people, right? But also the travel tips and the sort of, maybe not obscure tips, but something that you just can't read on Google, right? Something a bit more realistic in real life. So, I think we're both doing the same things.
I mean, I think we've both seen in our experience in our lives that travel is just so transformative. And to me, we live in a world now that is probably more divided than it has ever been. And I think travel is one of the things that can most help facilitate better connections and bringing us together and educating people and really making the world a better place in a lot of ways. And so to me, that's really exciting to be able to bring together content creators who are helping people inspire their travels and getting them to travel better. I can't think of anything I would rather be doing.
Oh, tell me about it. Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think travel is one of the only things that can actually really solve that, because a lot of the divisions are for people, aren't that person says this person's bad, but have you actually hang around with these people or gone to their country or saw the way they do things? Like, how else can you experience that outside of what you've been told other than travel? I don't know what else there is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds exciting times at Voyascape. Yeah. It's amazing. I checked out your website earlier. I saw the different pillars of what you just mentioned. It's like, oh wow, you're doing that. And then the guest thing that's coming up, the sleep things sounds great. Basically what me and Ted talked about.
There you go.
Awesome. Good to see it. Okay, I'm going to finish the episode with some quick fire travel questions, just 2 minutes worth.
Okay.
These are normally your favourite things worldwide. What first comes to mind? So I'm going to kick off with top 3 favourite countries.
Oh, that's hard. Because snorkeling and diving is such a big part of my travel experience, my list is going to skew very heavily that way. But I mean, Fiji would definitely be in the top 3. The Maldives would definitely be in the top 3. And then moving away from snorkeling and diving, I mean, the place that I find just inspires me more than anywhere is Japan. I love Japan.
Okay. And 3 countries, if you can go there tomorrow, where are you going to go? New countries.
New countries.
Yeah.
I really want to. I haven't explored much of Eastern Europe yet. I'd really like to get to Croatia, somewhere that really interests me. I would like to spend some time. All throughout that region, there's a ton of countries that are sort of clustered together that I just haven't spent nearly enough time in that part of the world. So probably all 3 countries could be there. But if I was going to go somewhere else, the other place that's very high on my list is Egypt, that I have not yet been, that I want to get to as well.
Okay. What's your top 3 favorite cuisines?
Probably Thai, Japanese, and Mexican.
Okay. And what about the place that's the best for the budget?
Sri Lanka is pretty good from a budget perspective, but I think where you get probably the most value for your money is probably still Thailand. I mean, Thailand is, in terms of like quality of the travel experience, ease of travel, food, hotels, you can do pretty phenomenally well on a pretty limited budget in Thailand.
Okay. A sunrise or sunset?
Definitely sunset.
Yeah. Okay. A favorite landmark?
Probably Angkor Wat.
Yeah. Okay. And the last question is going to be, if you could inspire someone to travel tomorrow with a few words or sentences as to why they should go, maybe somewhere new, what are you going to say?
Inspire them as to why to travel or where to go.
Why to travel?
Why to travel? I think just because it will change your perspective so dramatically. I mean, it really is. I think something that can improve and enrich the quality of your life more than almost anything else. And I think, people who invest their money and their time in travel just get so much back from that investment of both time and money. I don't think there's anything you can see a better return on investment from than your time traveling.
There you go. That is a great way to finish the episode. David, thanks for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks. Really enjoyed it.
Cheers. Thank you.